Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. Sitting opposite me is the Noel Edmonds to my Mr. Blobby, the Ant to my Deck, the wonderful Mr. Simon Keet. In today's episode, we land a seaplane off the coast of a quaint Scottish island with 1973's The Wicker Man. So join us as we dress up in an oversized Punch and Judy costume, find an overabundance of phallic-shaped symbols, and finally turn up the heat with a giant wicker sacrifice.
This podcast contains spoilers.
I'm David Heathbrow, Ghost Finder. Now, there are many haunted places up and down the country that if I were to sit here and list them all, by the time I was finished, I'd be a ghost. No, that's just a little joke, although I hasten to add that you should only joke about the forces of evil in the presence of a professional. I once knew a bloke who said that he didn't believe in the supernatural, and the next day he lost his car keys and his dog bit him. Now, you tell me that's not a sign of Beelzebub. But back to business. What I specialise in is determining if there is a presence within your home or office, but office do charge business rates. You and your husband are not trained to know if the fuse blowing on the kettle is a sign of faulty electrics or a message from Satan. I am. I graduated top of my class on the 2-day intensive course at the Lancashire School of the Macabre. For just a snip at £24.97, I will enter your house and check for any unwarranted paranormal. For specialist services, an overnight stay may be required, in which case you must provide adequate catering such as toad in the hole, peas and blancmange to finish. Unfortunately, I'm unable to give a specific price for this, as Dancing with the Devil is not only dangerous, but difficult to quote. That's David Heathbrow, Ghost Finder, as misquoted on BBC BAFTA-winning documentary Debunking Heathbrow. Court case pending. That's David Heathbrow. Find me on CFAX, not the Yellow Pages.
I think the way to start this is to say that there is actually quite a few different versions of the Wicker Man. Mainly because there's an old rumour, now how accurate it is I don't know, that the film production company British Lion, who made it, the guy who was essentially sorting out all the film reels for British Lion's productions mixed up some of the Wicker Man's film reels with offcuts of other films that were due to be incinerated, and put some of them in there. So there isn't actually all of the available footage that they shot still available. And so a lot of it is kind of been lost to time and in that respect. But they've managed recently, as I said, with this new 4K release, they've managed to like restore some of the old footage that they previously thought wasn't actually usable. So it's really interesting to see some shots that up until now perhaps many people wouldn't have seen. So I think that's a good place to kind of start, really, because anybody listening to this episode may go, oh, I don't remember that particular part, I don't remember this particular part. So it may be because there's a new version out. So if you haven't already got that new version, I would highly recommend it, because it's got probably as many versions as there are out there at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, the version I watched was the final cut was well good.
Yeah, so the final cut, where it differs from the theatrical cut, is there's a section at the beginning which shows Edward Woodward's character. Let's get his name up. Sergeant Howie. It shows him in church, and it shows that, you know, that part of his character, which in the original theatrical cut doesn't come until he's already on Summer Isle and he's praying at the tavern that he stays at. So that's the first inkling that we get that he is a really religious man, other than, his general portrayal of the character. But obviously in this final cut, and I think it's also in the director's cut as well, there is that footage at the beginning before we see the seaplane flying over the Scottish Isles. So I think that's a really, really important part that I think Christopher Lee, Robin Hardy and Edward Woodward were really kind of frustrated that wasn't in the original theatrical cut, because they were like, this is a really important part of Sergeant Howie's character that is completely lost. So it's really good that we've been able to get that back in whatever way we've been able to do that.
Did some of it get incinerated?
Yeah, some of it was incinerated. There's also another rumour which comes from Christopher Lee. So basically I want to say the CEO of, I'm just trying to find it now. So there's a chap called Michael Dealey, who is the managing director and producer of The Deer Hunter, The Italian Job and Blade Runner. But he was the managing director of British Lion. And apparently he saw an early cut of the film and really, really disliked it, to the point where I think he even said, I hate this film. And I think him and Christopher Lee clashed over it. And so I think there is a rumour that when they were constructing the M3 motorway in England, apparently some of the footage or some of the film was used in landfill as they were creating the M3. So how accurate that is, I don't know, but I do quite like the idea of somebody going, oh, that's all it's worth, this film, put it in the M3.
That feels like the start of Jumanji.
It does.
If they dig it up, it's going to be like The Ring.
Could you imagine? Somebody could dig, maybe that's how they got it. Maybe there was, an accident on the M3 and somebody's found some old Wicker Man.
The church.
Yeah, who knows? But I just wanted to start the episode that way because I think it's really important, because I'd seen this film for the first time, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And I've only really seen it once prior to, doing this episode for the podcast, but loved the film, but for some reason just never really returned to it. So there was a whole lot of the film that I didn't quite remember, other than perhaps the iconic elements of it. And I didn't realise kind of how the production was quite a difficult production for the reasons, we've mentioned, as well as a couple of ones that we'll kind of get onto. And I think that just adds to the kind of the charm of it, knowing that this was quite a difficult production, and yet they managed to end up with, at the very least, the theatrical cut that we had in the 70s, and that for many, many years we thought was the essential cut.
Yeah, for me, I think I don't think I always thought I'd seen this movie, but I think what happened is that I'd caught the ending of it when late one night when my mum was watching it or something. I was young, and I think and it's like, oh, the Wicker Man, and then there was that sort of reboot of it with Nicolas
Which
Cage.
I think the less said about that is the better.
Agreed, and I think. And there's lots of funny memes from that movie, but I'd always thought I'd sort of seen this, but I think this is one of those films, like, because it's sort of, once you know what happens in it, it's so iconic, that bit, but out of context, which is how I'd probably seen that bit. I mean, I just thought this film was like, oh, I don't really fancy watching The Wicker Man, it's a bit horrible. And then, I obviously thought about it again with Midsummer, because I like that as a horror movie, and I was like, oh, obviously influenced or just copied really the story from this. But yeah, watching it again today, I think it might be just one of my new favourite films. But it's so cool. It's like, I think it's when, like, the art form of something really, it seems like it's made with the right intentions, and that it's like some kind of authenticity. It doesn't really feel like anything's in there that shouldn't be in there, and it's just a real journey, isn't it? And it feels like it's it's sort of done in it's sort of, I don't know why, but it's like filmed in a way that isn't like too like, it's like quite an arty film, but the way it's shot and that seems to be just quite matter of fact. It's like, it's sort of,
Well,
I don't know.
I think there's so many different things going on with it, because I'll be the first to admit that I'm not really a fan of arty films. I think sometimes art, for lack of a better term, can essentially be anything, and when that approach is used, it's almost a thing of becoming easy, because you can essentially put random images together and suddenly they have meaning, because an audience, as anybody who's listened to this podcast will know, audiences will apply meaning to stuff where there isn't any meaning. So we will look at something and go, oh, that obviously means this is a metaphor for that particular thing. Then you'll hear the director say, oh, we done that because we run out of this particular colour. Oh, we didn't have the props for this, so we just had to use what we had. And I think that's part of the problem with arty films. But with this, I think because there's an approach to the filmmaking that I don't think we have anymore, where we kind of allow stuff to kind of breathe, and we allow stuff to kind of be interpreted in ways that audiences will naturally do, and doesn't necessarily try and force anything on. I think one of the themes that I got from this when I first watched it in preparation for the podcast is it feels like a film very much about acceptance. So obviously, take out of context the whole ending shot, which is the most iconic thing from this film, and all the horrible stuff that's going on. I find Howie's character quite unaccepting of this new cult or religion. And okay, we know it's a cult, and we know there's sinister things at play, and we know that Howie suspects there's sinister things at play. So I'm not for I'm not condoning anything they do or don't do, but it does feel like a film that is very much kind of trying to paint a picture of accepting different things and different ways of thinking other than what you have, because he is a very much a set in his ways character. He's obviously very, very religious, which, going back to those early shots that aren't in the original theatrical cut, that enforces that character even more. That from the very outs, he just doesn't accept a different way of thinking, even before there's perhaps anything really sinister at play.
Yeah, he's a man, and he's in the wrong place he's like really out of time and out of place in this world, isn't he?
Which obviously, once you kind of get to the ending, you understand why.
Yeah, but he's just the stiffest guy I've seen on the screen for ages. He's so stiff. He's as stiff as the phallic symbols in the film. The maypole. He's like the maypole. He is the maypole, and I feel like I love his character so much, because part of me, like acceptance, and like, is this just a guy that needs to get laid? Like, if he just got laid in that very, like, which I understand now is a very famous scene with Brett
Eklund, yeah.
If he just went for that, would he have ended up in the situation he is in at the end? And then I think, because of this is the bit that I totally missed before when I obviously caught the end of this movie, or I didn't really know that the leading role was this character, and this is why I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed learning about this town, and this all the weird stuff they get up to. I really enjoyed seeing it from his perspective, and he's quite interesting. There's just so many cool scenes, like when he meets like Christopher Lee and that, and he's like that. There's a part, isn't there, where he's looking out the window, and he's really tempted by what he thinks is probably the devil, but what he's there's just a lot of naked women in this movie, and he's having a bit of a hard time getting sleep. I love that he sort of finds it hard to get to sleep, and and the music, and there's so much of this, right? And I just absolutely like. I don't really know where to start, really. I guess we started this. There's a lot of cuts of the movie. There's bits that are lost and burned and incinerated, ironically. But yeah, this character, he's well good, I think.
And we said, or I said before we started recording, that The Wicker Man seems to be a film that I don't really hear a lot of people talking about, other than, for lack of a better what I call film snobs, and I don't mean that in a horror way, because I'm a bit of a film snob, but you don't hear it in the casual conversation really, unless somebody brings it up, and that's when people say, "Oh yeah, that's a really good film." In terms of horror films, certainly from the 70s, you hear about The Omen, you hear about The Exorcist a lot more than you do The Wicker Man. And, partially probably because of that is, the other films were more Hollywood based, whereas this one is much more independent in its, not only in its production, but also in its kind of feel. Like, this is a British folk horror, and it's a film that really does have so many layers. That is, it's not just a situation where like The Omen, just to compare it, because I think they came around the same sort of time. A lot of stuff happens in that which is very, what I would call not cliched horror, but stuff you expect to see in a horror. Whereas this film, I would say probably up until the final sequence, there isn't really a lot of horror going on here. It's very much just an uncomfortable feeling. I think a lot of us can relate to a feeling of going somewhere and it feeling a bit odd, and you don't really necessarily know why. You can't really put your finger on it, but something is just a bit odd, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sinister or that there's nasty things at play. But sometimes you just get that feeling, and I feel like this is a perfect visual and cinema kind of version of that, whereby for the majority of the film, it's almost like everything is a bit of a game. It's all a bit, it's all quite quirky and light-hearted. A lot of that comes from the music, but it just, nobody seems to be taking Howie seriously, and obviously we know why, but
yeah, I normally get bored in like detective stories and stuff. It's part of the reason I didn't always go back to watching the film. I guess it's going to come up at some point is Hot Fuzz. Like, I was like, just because it's a policeman in a town, like I'm sort of, I've seen enough of that growing up on like Channel 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
ITV, Midsummer Murders.
That sort of stuff. And I'd seen a lot of that. So, but obviously Hot Fuzz is great, and had so many parallels to this, and even cameos in this, isn't there, that you told me about, isn't it? The leading actor in this is in Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, so the reason why Edward Woodward is in Hot Fuzz is because obviously once you get to the the latter stages of Hot Fuzz and you find out that this village is a bit of a cult, it's almost a little bit of a nod to the Wicker Man, because of Edward Woodward playing Sergeant Howie. And this is an influential film. Like, you see so much of stuff in nowadays, or in the past sort of 20 years, you see an awful lot. One thing that I picked out that I've always liked about League of Gentlemen is very much based on the Wicker Man. There's even the phrase when, as I say, there are spoilers in this podcast, as we know, towards the end of the sequence where we find out that Rowan Morrison is kind of all in on it, and Christopher Lee's character Lord Summerall says, "You did beautifully." That's League of Gentlemen uses that straight away. You did beautifully, Tars. It's the same line essentially, and I think it's it's such an influential movie where even if it's not necessarily directly influenced, there are so many things that you can pick up on and go, oh, that's a little bit Wicker Man-esque, you know?
I think, yeah, and what I was saying earlier, you're saying you normally don't like arty movies and stuff. Where I feel like because the way this is shot and stuff is kind of just here it is. Like, for example, I guess what I'm trying to say, like an American Werewolf in London, when they go into that pub, similar atmosphere, goes into a pub and everyone stops and looks at him. There's so much tension in that scene, the way it's filmed and like how it's all silent and they all look around, and it's quite cinematic how they've done it, I think. But in this, it feels like you're in the pub. It feels just like filmed like a sort of.
It reminds me a little bit of those kind of old 70s documentaries that you used to see, where they get a reporter and they go, oh, well, in this is the amount of alcohol we consume in this pub. As you can see, everybody here is having lots and lots of fun. And I think it's that thing of, the artiness of this film, and the kind of imagery and the songs and everything that's kind of in there. I think it works because we're in a similar sort of position to Howie, where we're watching it and we're going, this is all a bit odd, that's a bit strange, oh, that song's quite nice, and then you listen a little bit closer to the lyrics, or if you watch it with the subtitles and you're reading the lyrics and you're going, oh, that's actually quite an inappropriate song, or quite a sinister song when you consider the lyrics of that,
So the musicians are in the movie, and the guy that composes in the movie some of those songs, he's called Giovanni. So that's his name, isn't it? And he looks very much like Suzanne Takes You Down to a Place.
Paul Giovanni.
Yeah, he looks like God. Why can't I think of his name? Leonard Cohen. He looks like Leonard Cohen, just sitting in this pub, coming out with these songs in very 70s roll necks, which I always, I'm invested at that point. And, for me, I actually really do like, I love films with music in there and musicals. I mean, this to me is much more of like a Harold and Maude sort of Cat Stevens thing, or like The Graduate musical film. It's more like it's in there and it has a place, and it at no point to me, I know, people say it spans genres, but at no point to me, I never felt like I was in a musical. To me, this is like something else is going on. And this does, a multi-genre film. And I feel like all my favourite films do like cross all the boundaries that you would imagine. I just saw this I remembered this very much like The Omen. Do you know what I mean? Or like, because of that end scene, I remembered it just as horror. And I was like, that's a horror movie. I know what happens in that. I'm not always in the mood to watch that. But this is like, it is. I think even like there's an interview on the extras with Christopher Lee and the director, and it's a critic interviewing him at that time. He's called Sterling Silver or something, and it's all very like formal interview. And at the end, Christopher Lee, they asked him to sing one of the bits he sings, and it's mental. And what was I saying about the music? I've forgotten. Oh damn! I have to cut that. Hold on, let me think. Oh yeah, no, sorry. Christopher Lee says, there's really something in this movie for everyone, which is just quite you expect, him to come out with more like depth than that, but he's all right. There is just something in there for everyone. That's a good way of looking at it.
And you've kind of, I think you've kind of hit upon why this film, for me, is so good, in that I think the power of that final that final sequence, when we start to know a little bit more about why he's really there, and obviously leading up to that incredible final shot. The power of that comes from because we haven't seen all of this horrible, horrible stuff up to this point. We've seen weird stuff, and there's been sort of implications and implied horror, but nothing up to this point is really sort of like what like I was saying earlier with The Omen, where that is actually horrible. We actually see someone die, we actually see this horrible thing. We don't really see that. A lot of it is just very much
a lot of red herrings up to that point, isn't there? When they dig up the grave expecting to see a girl's body, it's a hare. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah,
rabbit.
Yeah.
And all that. There's so much like symbolism in it of like that, or like old traditions. Like I found out from this. Didn't really realise that the Easter Bunny comes from the March hare, and that's why they like all these old ancient traditions. And it's like, he's in this world where they're still doing all these ancient things from our past that we probably subconsciously know about, and are superstitions that we sometimes all follow. I mean, there's not like a ladder that he walks under, or they're not all walking under ladders or something, but similar stuff. Like I don't know who it said on the extras, but it was on the special features. But like we all knock on wood, and the importance of wood in society. All this stuff, and then the Wicker Man burning the wooden man, and it's just there's a lot of things they've thought about, I think, and you can really go deep. And I mean the it really makes you, by the end of it, I guess as well in this cut you see how religious he is at the beginning, but by the end of it all gets his beliefs become more prominent, and he seems more like radical, and he seems almost just as radical as them when they're going to kill him.
Yeah, like I would say probably I almost had to check myself a lot of the time, because I think I would say for the first sort of half of the film, I was kind of leaning towards Howie being a bit too much. Like, he just automatically disregards this completely different way of life, this completely different, belief system, which I found a little bit sort of like, well, you are being a bit of a knob. Like, okay, yes, you've got a valid reason for being there, and obviously a very important reason. You're looking for a missing girl. Absolutely, that's 100% important. But along the way, you're like, it seems like he was going out of his way to kind of make his feelings known. What your belief system is wrong. Which obviously I think is obviously perhaps a little bit more the way of thinking in the 70s. That perhaps would have been a bit more the norm. Howie's character would probably be how a lot of people would have been in the 70s in terms of kind of religion. Obviously in 2025 it's a bit more, I think that's the beauty sometimes of film just as a whole. Like, I'm watching this with a different set of eyes to somebody who would have watched it in the 70s. And because of that, I'm now getting a totally different experience. That doesn't make it a better experience or a worse experience, just a different experience. And as you say, towards the end of the film, he does get more radical. He gets that kind of
damning him to hell kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a case of, and also I think as well, his belief system gets questioned by himself, because now he's kind of he believes it. But I think there's points where it's like, I kind of got, the reason he's shouting this stuff is it's not necessarily for everybody else around him. It's almost him shouting it because he realizes, oh, am I, is the stuff I believe in, is it real? Is it not real? Is this new way that I've obviously been succumbed to? It's almost like he's questioning himself, because I'm not saying God puts him in that position, but it's almost like in those testing times is when your faith gets tested the most, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and one of the most vivid images for me is that, obviously it's the ending where he's in the Wicker Man, and it's burning, and they're all like swaying to it's very much like he is Christ, like he is like Jesus at that point, in the sort of, he is on the crucifix, and there's all these people happily worshipping him, and it's like the visual, in every church there's a crucifix on the wall in stained glass, whatever, with a dying man on it, and then there's a lot of people just singing their hymns, and it's like it's almost like, oh God, it's so deep, because it's almost like, wow, he's experiencing the sacrifice of, like, the ultimate sacrifice that his God did for everyone. Now he's doing it.
He's literally becoming the thing he believes in.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's
it's like, but it's more distorted because it's like, yeah, but it doesn't make sense. And it's like, yeah, but why would he be in this? Why have you brought me here? Why am I here? And then it's like, I had this the other day. Like, I was on the way back from somewhere, and I thought, oh yeah, that was it. I went to see it, like a guitar teacher again. He just loves classical guitar music, and he thinks the real, true, deep meanings is in this classical guitar music. It's not anywhere else. Like it's certainly not in rock and roll or like contemporary music. Like it's like, yes, it can display some emotions, but the real thing, Simon, is always in this classical music. And I came home and I was driving. I always had these questions. I was like, what if? So I just assume he's wrong, that he's not experiencing the full spectrum of where depth can come from music. But I was like, what if he's right? And in his position in that Wicker Man, he must be thinking as well, like, he'd have those thoughts of like, what if these guys are right? These old gods, the sun, like he's literally being like sacrificed to sun god.
And that's the thing that I kind of picked up on a lot. And this isn't to say that he has it coming at all, but there is an element of where I felt very much a case of it. In another layer, is this God essentially testing him and punishing him for not accepting other people and other ways of thinking, because I think from his perspective, not that I'm too au fait with Christianity or anything, from like,
thinks they're all heathens.
Yeah, he thinks they're pagans and and it's sacrilege and everything like this. But from a perspective of the Christian belief of love your fellow man, love forgive and all of these things, it's almost a thing of, well, how far do you go to get that point?
And also, you can like read it so deep because like he's like we've all met this repressed character who's a job, like if you worked with him would be a job's worth.
Oh yeah, he's the sort of person who 100% would see you with a can of beer, right, and say, "Oh, is this your car set?" And you say, "Yes." Open the door for you, let you get in, and then say, "Oh, I'm now going to give you a ticket." He's that kind of, he's an absolute job's worth.
But then you're like, why is he being sent out on his own on a plane? So, we need to go sort out this crime. There's a missing girl, and then he gets in the plane, and then they're like,
Howie.
Yeah, and then like, we sent Howie to do that. So hopefully it'll be a few weeks. So, thank God. I can't deal with him breathing down my neck every 5 minutes. And it's like, if you repress these, when you're that, he's repressing some, like I think it's pretty clear at the end he's a virgin, right? Is what they think he is, at least, and it seems pretty obvious. And then he's a sad character because he's a repressed. He's very likable in this as well because at the end of the day he's trying to solve the murder of of a missing girl, and what he's using everything he can to try and work it out. But the real story here is that he ends up in this ridiculous situation. It's like every choice he's taken up to this point, and if he'd just give in to some of his maybe like desires or whatever, maybe he wouldn't have ended up quite the same in this ridiculous situation. They even try, and when they knock him out, they're actually doing him a favour, I think, aren't they? When they put the hand there, they're like, "Oh, sleep well, my policeman." Do you know that when they try and put the hand there so he has a longer sleep so he'll miss Mayday?
That's something I never picked up on.
Yeah, they're trying to
essentially
they're trying to say, she's trying to sort of look after him, I think, and be like, "You don't want to be here for this. They're going to kill you," sort of thing, or like, "You don't want to see what we're about to do."
I think there's an element of that, but I think there's also an element of, because there's that thing of he has to come up there willingly for it to be the right kind of sacrifice. But I get that there is that.
Oh, that's a part of their conspiracy.
Yeah. But I do think there is probably that element of, because I think it's Britt Eklund's character who does that, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're right. Do they really think a magic hand will put him to sleep? I think you're right. I think
I think there is a case of, case to be made,
Mm.
because we just kind of accept that everybody on the island and everybody in the village just kind of 100% believes. But there must be at some point, especially at the time that they're at, that, you know, the whole reason for this, you know, this final sacrifice is because their crops didn't, you know, failed the previous harvest. So there's an element of maybe this is the point where people start questioning Lord Summerisle and that, you know,
Yeah,
that
for
kind
sure.
of belief. So, you know, there may be, you know, is that kind of that thing of Britt Ekland going, you know, I understand that we have to sacrifice you, but it would be nice if you didn't know what was happening, you didn't, you know, you didn't have to experience it, if you know what I mean, you know, as you just kind of said, like.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I thought originally that they were just putting him to sleep so he'll wake up once all the celebrations are over, so he'll miss that thing. And because I thought they originally were going to sacrifice the girl, but then I remember now that at the end he said, "We've predicted your every move up to this point," and it's like, so even that might have been just a part of the act. And so I guess as well, what I don't. I have to rewatch it a few times to understand at what point do you think they start to think he is going to be the sacrifice, like. They know a policeman's coming to the island, because they're already hidden the photos of the girl when she arrives.
My interpretation, and I think they kind of they don't explicitly say it, but they very, very much imply it, that Lord Summerisle was the one who sent the letter.
Oh, I might have missed that.
Whether or not, as I say, I don't think it explicitly states it, but I think it is in that final kind of speech from Christopher Lee where, you know, we needed somebody just like you. We needed a willing participant, a story of a missing girl, you know, that kind of thing.
So in that case, I think they knocked him out. I think they were trying to put him to sleep. It's all part of the plan.
But I think there probably is an element where, you know, that is Britt Ekland's belief in her religion and her system being, you know, perhaps being questioned in going, oh well, we can still sacrifice you, but I still don't want you to know what's going to happen, because that will make it worse. So I think, and as I say, like I've said to begin with, audiences will apply meaning wherever, as we are now establishing. But with this film, there is so many of those layers and so many of those questions and so many of those kind of philosophical elements that I think an awful lot of it is valid. An awful lot of it is, you know, is stuff to question and, you know, think upon.
There's a great scene where he walks into the whole classroom, but it's hilarious. Like, he walks in and he goes, "I am a police officer."
Hey,
and he
I'm
goes,
a police officer.
Yeah, and then he goes, "As you can see." He like realizes he's wearing all the stuff. It's like very obvious.
I think that's brilliant that for the majority of the film he is just wearing a police officer's uniform. He has no other clothes other than his pajamas, and I think that is just another way of him, or sorry, another way of the film totally telling you what type of character he is. His life is probably the church and being a police officer, and that is it. You know, this isn't a character who you can see, you know, going to the cinema, or, you know, going down the pub for a drink. You know, obviously he ends up going to a pub and has a bit of whiskey, doesn't it? And he moans about the colour of the beans and the fact that everything off the food is from cans.
Yeah,
you know, which I think is an early hint.
Oh, definitely.
An early hint. Obviously, the reason everything's out of a can is because they're crop and they're harvested.
So I was totally on board with this. I couldn't work out what was. I don't know if someone that would, if you're thinking about like trying to work out what's happening, I don't think I was doing that, but I didn't. I was totally along for the ride with all of the plot points. I was like, the harvest doesn't come, and that's why the photo's not up, because the harvest didn't come, and then they're planning to sacrifice this girl. But were they ever going to sacrifice the girl, do you think?
No, I think it was all a ruse, really.
I see.
I think.
Do you think because they don't really want to sacrifice someone on the island?
I think probably, yeah. Or they, not so much because they don't want to do it, but more because they don't think it will be successful.
Oh, not as powerful as
I think, you know, I think this, essentially it's the old, okay, in a slightly different facet to what we usually see, but it's the old ritual virgin sacrifice.
They
But
want that.
usually it's a female, but in this instance
It's a twist.
it's a twist on that old kind of, I don't even know what you call it, that old folk tale, or that old, you see that in so many different films. It's, we need a sacrifice of a virgin, and all of that. And I think it is a nice little twist for it to be a male character, be that sacrifice. And,
I mean, in a way, because that trope, for us at least, we've seen that loads of times in movies, and that sacrifice is a trope throughout. It's an archetype, isn't it? Sacrifice the virgin type thing. It's like it's something that you would have been aware of in the 70s.
If you're going to do a film about sacrifice and devil worship and pagans, and you're going to have a virgin sacrifice.
Yeah, so that's also a clue from the beginning as well, really. It's like that he is.
But I think the reason why, unless you're really, really astute, you're not necessarily going to pick up on it, because I can't certainly think of any film prior to this that would have had a male virgin sacrifice, and after this film, I can't think of any other film where it's a male virgin.
Film with a male virgin, apart from 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yeah,
like an older male. Do you know what I mean? Like
that's a very different film. Yeah. Put those two together. I think probably we've mentioned obviously a couple of the cast and a couple of the crew, but if we just go through those bits for those listening. So it was directed by Robin Hardy, who The Wicker Man is probably his most well-known work. He also directed a not too successful sequel called The Wicker Tree.
Not seen that, have you?
No, I don't think it's that closely linked to this.
Yeah.
It's more of a spiritual sequel, I think. The writer of the screenplay was Anthony Schaefer, who had previously worked on Sleuth and Frenzy, and then later went on to direct Death on the Nile, the 1978 version. The producer was Peter Snell. We have, as we mentioned earlier, Paul Giovanni, the composer. The cinematographer was Harry Waxman, and how he got onto the film is quite an interesting story, because the director, Robin Hardy, didn't want Harry Waxman. I don't think it was anything against Harry Waxman. He just wasn't. I think he had a certain cinematographer in mind. British Lion had worked a lot with Harry Waxman in the past, and they said that we need him on this because that final shot where we see the Wicker Man fall, to be honest, you can probably only do that once, maybe a couple of times at max. But if you don't get it the first time, it's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks of prep to get it back to that point. So they really needed somebody who could handle that shot and make it so you could get it essentially on that first go. So that was why he kind of came onto the film. And he worked on a film called Sapphire as director of photography, went on to work on the Pink Panther strikes again, and Flash Gordon. He was part of the additional photography team. And then the cast, obviously, we have mentioned Edward Woodward as Sergeant Howie, who, I know we've kind of said it, but I will say it again, such a great performance. I totally believe him 100% as this rigid, repressed, Jobsworth police officer. And he's not even Scottish, and he does a fantastic Scottish accent where there's no holes in it. Well, from an English ear anyway, and from, an ear who's not Scottish themselves. We have Christopher Lee as Lord Summerisle, who I think is perhaps one of the best bits of casting in movie history. We have Diane Salento as Miss Rose, the school teacher. We have Britt Eklund as Willow. We have Lindsay Kemp as Aldir McGregor, who is the innkeeper at and I can't remember the name of the pub now.
It's the Green Man.
The Green Man. And in a very, very early role, we have Jerry Cooper as Rowan Morrison, who any EastEnders watchers will perhaps recognise her as who plays Rosie Miller in EastEnders. I first saw Jerry Cowper in an episode of Only Fools and Horses, where she plays, can't remember the character now, but she's a love interest, and it's an episode called Tea for Free where Del Boy goes hand gliding.
I think he's been in EastEnders too. I looked on his IMDb. Main guy.
Edward Woodward.
I think so. He was on his thing. I scrolled down. I was like, oh, there you go.
He probably. I mean, comes a point where if you're English, you've probably had an opportunity.
You can just say yes if you want to.
It's either going to be EastEnders, Emmerdale, or Coronation Street if you want to be in a soap, really.
Christopher Lee absolutely loves this movie, doesn't he? And he said that a lot of them, he said, we mostly done it. They did this movie for free. I think a lot of he did it for free. Someone else, one of the producers, the director hardly made. No, I don't know if they didn't make money out of it, but they didn't really take any salary from the movie because they all just really believed in it. Apparently, the script was made up over the full idea was made up over a course of some mental weekend on some island or something. That's what he said on this interview. I don't quite know what mental weekend they were talking about, but it feels like a fever dream. It feels like something not fever. It feels like something that full inspiration coming down, and then they put it on the screen. Do you know what I mean? It feels like a whole fleshed out idea. It doesn't sound like they lost their way along. It doesn't feel like it lost its way at any point and turned into something else that was not part of the vision. It felt like they fully achieved what they wanted from it.
Absolutely. And just a nice little tidbit for Christopher Lee. So he spoke with Anthony Schaefer, I think a couple of years before, and they were speaking about this idea, and at that point it didn't have a name, and they were talking about this general idea of this story and whatnot. And then a couple of years later, Anthony Schaefer contacted Christopher Lee and said, I would like you to be in a movie called The Wicker Man. And Christopher Lee apparently went, you're doing a movie on druids, are you? And apparently Anthony Schaefer was a little bit annoyed at that comment. But I think all of that stuff that you just said kind of bleeds through onto the celluloid, in the sense that, not to say that if you get paid or you get paid a lot of money for a film that it's never going to be that good, because that's not the case at all. But you do seem to find that when things are passion projects and when people believe in the script or in the source material or whatever it is that you're doing, when they believe in it and they're a little bit more invested in it, because there isn't a case of it just being a paycheck, certain things kind of start to fit together, and sometimes you're able to kind of get over that frustration, and sometimes it creates a lot of frustration because you can believe in a certain way of doing things, and if people don't agree with it, then you can clash. But I think that certainly comes through, and I think there is a real love for the film that seems to come through from all of the people. You can tell that everybody's invested. Christopher Lee seems at home in this kind of role.
It feels a bit James. It's hard, isn't it? Because I assume James Bond, Man with a Gun came a lot after this.
Yeah, I believe that was 1976.
Oh, okay. So
1974.
That's very close.
So it probably would have been made around about the same time.
It feels like Lord Summerisle, you know what I mean?
Lord Scaramancer.
Yeah,
it's very similar, isn't it?
It feels like, it almost feels very close to. It feels close to that movie, I guess. It is in the time it was made and everything. And but it doesn't. There's a really good scene, isn't there, where he takes that young guy to sort of go and have it off with Brett Etkin's character, who's like Aphrodite. It's like. He just, and I don't know if it's his son or whatever, but he's in a kilt for some reason. And he's like, look, at that point, what is happening in this film? Because it really cuts away. And there's like some snails crawling over each other. And our main guy's trying to get some sleep. and then he's hearing the music underneath them. He's hearing like the sex next door, and outside, Christopher Lee is doing this like monologue about how he'd like to be like one of the animals. You know how, or like one of the animals, like they don't have. They don't go to bed at night feeling bad for their sins, and there's loads of them across the whole planet, and how, they're not pathetic like humans. I don't know what he sort of says, but, at that point, you're like, yes, Christopher Lee. This is Christopher Lee film. This is like using him to his utmost fullest potential of this like Shakespearean monologue type character in this movie.
Yeah, they certainly didn't waste him at all. I think, it's difficult, isn't it? Because whenever you first see an actor or actress in something, that is usually what you remember them for. So for a lot of people, he is Dracula.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it would have been difficult for people to kind of accept him as anything other than Dracula.
I think he was trying to get out the typecasting of Hammer House of Horror movies.
Yeah.
And this, I don't know how far this, to me, I think still a bit like this, but has a lot more substance to it, I guess, than being like Crypt Doctor or whatever, Crypt Man.
Yeah, I think it shows his intelligent side of acting. Not that his Dracula days were unintelligent, but I think with Dracula, he got an awful long way with a look, with a glance. Whereas here, a lot of his, it is very Shakespearean in his kind of delivery, and his, Christopher Lee is pretty much like that anyway. I don't see this as being, not that I'm saying Christopher Lee has a weird cult underneath him, or did do, but I don't see this being too different from him as a person. Like, I've seen him in interviews where he seems very similar to how Lord Summerisle is, in the sense of he's very, very charismatic. He has a very good way with words, and he's very, very charming.
What do you think of Lord Summerisle?
Well, I think
he's kind of a neutral. He kind of doesn't really believe in all the stuff, really, and then he's he's got the reason the island that makes all this rare fruit or has these big can grow all this stuff there is because of sort of science from his like great grandfather and then his father, and then he's sort of carrying that on, and they're allowing this sort of the old pagan ways to sort of carry on, and because it all works in tandem with each other.
Well, I think Lord Summerisle is very good displacing his responsibility, in the sense that he obviously, his kind of way, not necessarily of dealing with things, because I don't think it ever gets really to that point, but he's very good at very much it being very matter of fact and saying that, these gods, this is what they need, so therefore whatever I do doesn't matter, because it's what the gods are saying. It's what the gods need. I've been told this when I was younger. This is what I tell, the people on this island, and we've seen the fruits of our labour, literally the fruits of their labour. And I think it's a very good way of him kind of dissolving himself of any responsibility.
Well, I don't think he necessarily believes in the old gods like they do. I think he believes in science, and I don't quite know why I think because he maybe indulges in it. Like, he likes sort of the naked women dancing in his garden. He has a good view of them.
He certainly gets the best out of everything, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He has this whole island is his to do whatever he wants with, and that's what I kind of mean. Like, that's his way of, whether or not he believes it is a kind of different question, but that's his way of kind of absolving himself of going, well, I've had all of this. I have all of this, and it's because of what we've done in sacrifice to our gods.
And he kind of also knows he's at risk of, like, right near the end, he says the only person you can sacrifice next year if your crops fail is Lord Summerisle, and he like shudders because he knows he sort of, you can see on his face from great acting Christopher Lee that he's kind of right there. Do you know what I mean? It's this virginal full, like, he carries all these deep meanings.
Essentially, that's the purest kind of sacrificial image you could conjure up. So if that doesn't work, this has to work for you, not maybe not in the sense of what he says literally, and they will sacrifice you, but almost in the sense of, if this doesn't work, then all of this goes, because they ain't going to believe in you for much longer. You'll have a few people, but eventually, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier about Britt Ekland, is that, okay, she's doing all of the, the bidding and, following on from, what I presume is Lord Summerisle's plan. But there has to be an element of going, well, we followed Lord Summerisle's plan last year and we didn't get the harvest. Why is that? Is it because what he's saying, we weren't pure enough with our sacrifice, or whatever it may be? Or is it because all of this is a load of old, load of old hogwash, and it's just been pure luck, and our luck has run out? Now, is there a different God to what we believe? And I think it is about, a lot of the film is about kind of questioning beliefs and viewpoints, and it's quite distracting having the film on in the background, isn't it? Because just for context, the last couple of episodes we have had the film on in the background, and I've been trying to explain a point, and we've got to the scene in the film. So if you are watching it or planning to watch it, we've got to the scene in the film where essentially Britt Ekland's character, Willow, is seducing Sergeant Howie from the next room with her singing. And just as I was about to formulate and really, get my point out, Willow is, for lack of a better term, completely naked, just dancing in front of a door, and it was quite distracting. And
do you know about the Rod Stewart thing?
No, I don't think I do.
So on the interview with, apparently part of it is done by a body double, which I actually think.
Oh yeah, yes, I knew that.
And that
because I think she was pregnant at the time.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of questioned, but I think they had a deal like they can only film her from the waist up.
Yeah.
So, but Rob, I don't know how if this is a myth or whatever, but in the interview on the special features, that Christopher Lee, that it's sort of brought up that it's like, oh well, Rod Stewart's trying to get stopping the movie from coming out, because Rod Stewart was with Britt Ekland at the time, and I don't know if he might have had a problem with this scene, and then he was trying to stop the movie from coming out. I don't know how true that is, but they talk about it. But Christopher Lee seemed to think it was true, and that was at that time. So I think, it's kind of interesting trying to block a movie out because your girlfriend's done like a naked scene or something. But she is amazing in this, though, and I don't quite know. They overdubbed her. With another actress, overdubbed her. She was trying to work on a Scottish accent, but I don't know if it ever got there, and so I don't think it's her singing either. And they overdubbed her with someone that I would say wasn't any good at a Scottish accent either.
No,
because that was the real. That for me was the bit I was like, "What is happening?" That was
if there was going to be a criticism of the film, it would be
her overdub.
Because I often, like, before researching, I was like, something off with Britt Ekland's. Either she just can't do a Scottish accent, or they've overdubbed it badly. And as it turns out, they have overdubbed it, but obviously with somebody who equally cannot do a Scottish accent. So it's bit
mental, isn't it?
But what's interesting is that Lord Summerisle doesn't have a Scottish accent.
No.
And essentially, he's grown up on the island, so he probably would have a Scottish accent.
And the stuff they're all wearing, like Britt Ekland says in the interview, like, it's not necessarily from a specific time frame, so like it wouldn't really matter if she was just where is she from? I'm not sure. I get European. Britt.
No, she's English.
Is she English?
Yeah. Oh well, she I think she has Swedish parents, but she's born in England. As far as I'm aware,
it wouldn't have mattered if her accent was not perfect, or she just didn't her normal accent, because this film kind of feels. It's quite trippy, and it wouldn't really matter. You wouldn't necessarily.
If anything, it would add to the oddness of it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, weird idea. And apparently, there's lots of things of her maybe not getting on with the director. But when I watched her interview of her when she's a bit older, she sort of says she doesn't really. I don't know, the one I saw anyway. She doesn't really say she didn't really get on with anyone. But I think she said rather than it feel like a whole camaraderie of everyone, it felt like everyone. She said he was very serious. That Howie, our main guy, was quite a serious actor,
and
so was Christopher Lee. And I did not expect it to be like, when they're filming Jesus Christ Superstars, like, oh yeah, these guys obviously all went out together and stuff. But with this film, it's just like they are all like they're in their bedroom going, how am I going to do this scene?
Yeah,
how do I get the most out of this character?
Yeah, they're going through their lines, they're doing their backstory.
Yeah.
They're preparing almost, and I think obviously in one respect that is a good thing, because I think as we I just kept saying different syllables there, not any words. As we've kind of already said, those performances are really, really strong. I think if you take out one of those two characters, or one of those two actors, I should say, if you take out Edward Woodward or you take out Christopher Lee, the other one isn't necessarily quite as good, because I think the beauty of it is that the charisma of Christopher Lee is even more powerful because he's standing often opposite someone who's quite upright and rigid and looks very much like every single thing he does is very well thought out, whereas Christopher Lee looks very much like he's just taking it all in, and vice versa, so the rigidness looks more rigid because he's opposite someone who's very comfortable in his own sort of skin, with Christopher Lee's portrayal.
Hi, I'm Barry Wood, CEO, President and Visionary of Barry Wood's International Agency to the Stars. We are looking for the next Michael Kitchen or Felicity Kendall, and that could be you. Simply send a fax to 0224 stars, and before you know it, you could have the agent that puts the Raz into razzmatazz. I've worked with some of the finest performers in the country, from John Nettles to Jimmy Nail, Patsy Palmer to Beverly Callard. The list goes on. Soon that could be you, only with Barry Wood's International Agency to the Stars, where Hollywood meets Harrogate. I said to Nick Berry, stick with me, son, you'll be bigger than Peter Egan, and I defy anybody to tell me I'm wrong.
There is some serious chemistry in that through the wall scene. Like, it's the music, it's like the sort of eroticness of the whole thing, but it feels like they have an on-screen, somehow in that scene through the door, it feels like he really does have some chemistry with her that sort of they never quite get to.
One thing I wanted to kind of say is that I usually have a big problem with. Well, let me preface this. With modern films, when there's nudity for the sake of nudity, and usually female nudity, because of, unfortunately, women being exploited often a lot of the time in Hollywood over the years, I usually have a big problem with it, because often it's not needed. Often it is just put there as a little bit of eye candy for the blokes watching. And I realise that my next sentence is going to sound like I'm saying it because I want some eye candy, but it's nothing to do with it. I think the nudity here, whether you necessarily like it or dislike it, I think it works in the context of a lot of the imagery and a lot of the themes of this is about fertility and and sex, essentially. A lot of the themes of that, so it kind of works. It's not necessarily just put there as a bit of 70s, bit of blue for the dads. It's not that. It probably is there for that as well. Don't get me wrong. It's the 70s. They probably went, we need a bit of eye candy. Let's get Brett Eklund in. Unfortunately, that probably was the case at the time. But I think in the context of the film,
it's quite an erotic film. Like, I don't
exactly.
think they're not hiding from
and don't
that.
get me wrong, if you take the nudity out of the film, it probably works. Maybe not quite as well.
Feel to, you'll just get, because he is so stiff.
You would probably still have a very, very good film. But I think essentially what I'm saying is usually I'd be the first one to kind of point out, we don't need that. It's just there for the sake of it. It's just there to be a little bit kind of racy and a bit saucy. I think here I accept it a little bit more because of the, because of the themes of the film. I think if we were making, or let's say in the 2006 remake, I believe that's when it came out with Nicolas Cage, I haven't seen that, and I probably will never see that unless
You've not? Have you seen the clip?
I've seen. Not
where
the bees, not the
You got
bees.
to watch that. Funny. It doesn't really upset me about that they did that. I feel like it's.
I get why they done it. I
Yeah.
get why they done it, because I feel like again, probably only certain people are going to go back and watch this film. I feel like if you want new viewers, you probably do have to do a remake.
Yeah, I think this. It feels the fact that their sort of erotic scenes happen through a wall. It's like it isn't just throwing it in there for the sake of it. And I feel like I don't know. It's more in line with how like Suspiria has a lot of nudity in it. Like I've only seen the modern remake of that. I don't know if the old one did, but you never when you watch that film.
I believe it did as well.
Yeah, you're never really thinking, oh, this is just. Well, maybe you are, but it doesn't seem that exploitative in that way. But
I think there are films that do it a lot better. I think obviously I watch a lot of horror films.
Oh, and they just
and generally speaking, a modern horror film will just have somebody getting out of the shower topless or completely naked, and it's like, do we need to see them getting out of the shower there? No, we don't. Why is it in there? Oh, because you're trying to come across as edgy. You're trying to come across as racy. You're trying to appeal to 18-year-old, adolescent boys. Really, that's kind of why it's there, and that's where I kind of have a problem, because it's not needed. It doesn't add anything or take anything away from the story.
It's the same as like adding. You mean it's the same as adding the ultra violence in the movie? It doesn't need it.
Absolutely.
It sometimes feels like that's you're selling the film on the vibe. But I guess you're allowed to do that. I guess.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not saying you're not allowed to do it. I think for me, it's just one of those things where it's. I suppose I look at films and I appreciate the films that what they've done on screen is hard to do. Like what I was saying earlier about, I've come from, I've trained in theatre, and it's so easy to just do random shit. Just do the most off the wall rubbish, and the amount of times that I've done in theatre, something completely random and completely bonkers that is so off the wall, and somebody's gone, that's really great, that's a really good way of showing the indictment of society at the moment, and actually you've done it because it's a bit different. And I think that anybody can do that. Anybody can really kind of do that. And I think it takes a little bit of skill to put something like nudity in there, which is obviously very easy to create a reaction, and have it mean something, and have it not necessarily be there just for what you initially think is the main reason. One scene I do want to talk about, and it's not just because it's on screen now, but the scene or the sequence where Howie is essentially going around looking for Rowan Morrison in every single home and searching every single home. The music that plays over that perfectly demonstrates what I was saying earlier about it all feels like a bit of a game, because it makes it seem like it's almost like hide and seek. Everybody in the village is playing, or in the town is playing hide and seek with Howie, and Howie's just looking for Rowan Morrison. It feels very jovial and very, light-hearted.
I just realised, one thing I was going to mention to you was when he's in this classroom. I've said it before, but there's a girl that kind of looks a bit odd that he has an interaction with. It's funny when he goes in that classroom, because she's like teaching, does that normal cutaway they're doing like Buffy or something, or all sort of things when there's always a teacher and they're not just wrapping up a lesson. He interrupts, obviously, she's going around looking, and she's like, yes, and the symbol of the maypole is the phallic shape of the penis. She goes, anyway, and it's like, oh, hello, welcome to now, what are you doing here? And it's like this like funny sort of silly moment. And then he's like, what are you teaching in here? It's ridiculous what you're teaching. And then, but he opens he thinks the missing girls, he obviously has desk. There's one desk empty, and then he opens the desk, and then there's a beetle who's tied to a beetle or something, whatever. It's tied to a nail and it's going around in circles. And then this like weird little girl goes, "Yes, it keeps going around in circles until it gets closer and until it's stuck to the nail." It's like I realised that's him.
Yeah,
Like, he's
yeah.
going round the maypole until he's stuck until he he is the and it's that's so cool.
Yeah, and it's something which you may pick up on, you may not pick up on. I didn't necessarily pick up on that until you've just said it.
No, I just
But
picked up on it then.
Yeah, but it makes so much sense. And I like that about films where there's stuff there that, again, it's not just put there because it looks a bit odd, because it is a bit odd. Why is there a beetle tied to a nail inside someone's desk? Oh, because it's a weird town. That's the reason. No, the reason is it's showing you, it's giving you a hint of what's going to come later. It's showing you essentially what's going to end up happening with Howie's character.
Yeah, it's like, does he have free will or is he tied? Like, because the beetle's moving on its own accord, but it is also tied down. Like, when he arrives, is he really, he doesn't come there of his free will really on that last bit, or he's kind of tied to this whole
It links back to that, we've predicted every move you've made wonderfully, you've made, one thing I do want to say that really makes me laugh, and I think it again goes back to that thing of how he seems to go from 0 to 100 quite quickly, and it's that thing where he finds out that he asks everybody, "Do you know Rowan Morrison?" And then he finds out they're lying because he looks in the register and says, "You're all filthy liars." And it's like all right,
and you're the worst one of them all.
To be fair, they're kids, and that but it seems like, again, because they're not part of his belief, straight away it's everything seems black or white to him, and I think that's another example of that, where they've lied to him, so therefore they are wrong, whether or not the kids are just essentially following their elders in this world. But to him, because it's part of a world he doesn't agree with, everything is bundled in all together. And I think that's what I was trying to say. Well, goes into what I was saying earlier about he's just not very accepting of anything other than what he believes. And vice versa. They're not very accepting of his belief.
I think, yeah, I mean that, but they are more understanding of his. Like, all the women he meets in this movie are very. They kind of say, well, it's bad if the child's, when he digs up the grave and it's a hare, not the girl, he's like, sacrilege and all this stuff. And she's like, well, yeah, maybe in your Christian understanding, but not. And she even says, your religion is a comparative religion. You have things you believe.
Do you not teach nothing of Christianity? Only as a comparative religion.
Yeah. And it's like, so I think they actually, these people I think are a little bit more like open. I mean, they're clearly a bit more open-minded and a bit more loose and more in 70s fashion. They're having a lot of, they're like all banging they're all making love out on the they're all making love in the outside.
You're such a romantic.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I mean,
do you think the best moment of this whole movie is Christopher Lee with a massive, like, straight-haired wig on doing this crazy dance march? And they're like, they make him dance more. Like, that's not good dancing. And they're like, yeah, you need to dance more to Howie. And Christopher Lee is just...
I don't know.
Bit. It looks like Cher.
I don't know of how many actors can pull that off and still hold a level of kind of... I'm not going to say dignity, but very few people could pull that off without you just laughing at it because it's ridiculous. Like, I've only just got the symbolism as well of the whole Punch and Judy costume.
Yeah,
how he ends up wearing it is. It's that thing of he doesn't realise he's part of the act.
He's the fool. He's the fool on the hill.
But and I think in terms of something we don't often talk about on this podcast is costume, and
it's so good.
Everything about the the May Day celebrations in this is the costumes are totally 100% on point. Obviously, we've just mentioned that the Punch and Judy costume that Howie wears. We've obviously mentioned Christopher Lee with his Cher
The face mask of the animal faces has been done so many times since, you know, like having in horror movies and stuff.
And it's usually done to be quite scary. Here, I don't think it's not done to be scary. I think there probably is an element of, but it's done, I think, in a way that is, again, very jovial and very kind of, being at one with the land and the animals and the world in which you live in.
Bunch of hippies.
Yeah,
the what Brecklin was saying as well about there was no, it's like some of them are in 70s looking outfits, some of them in like old school like dress and stuff. It's like it makes the film more timeless. I think like the fact that it is, it feels. This film it feels modern, and especially on this like the 4K. I think I watched the Blu-ray version. And it just looks insane. Like it's so cool.
It is a very beautiful looking film.
Yeah, and it's
wow. An element of that comes from obviously the cinematographer and the way it's shot. Obviously, that final shot is about as iconic as you can get.
Yeah,
but I think an awful lot of it goes down to things like the production designer and the location manager. Because if you haven't got the locations, like there was some really nice shots
at the beginning,
sort of like halfway through where he first goes to the Summer Isles like mansion.
Oh yeah,
and he goes through that carriage. He goes through that garden.
Yeah,
and for me, actually, it was something that I didn't expect to kind of get, but I got quite nostalgic watching it a little bit because there's a great shot of them going through the orchards, and I don't know the name of the tree or the plant, but essentially it's this lovely tree with like sort of pinky white petals, and the shot literally pushes right up against the branch, and you can see the branch sort of bend as the camera goes into it and then flings kind of back away. And for me, like my nan's house, she was always very much into her gardening and into her plants, and that there was a similar, I don't know if it was a tree, but there was a similar kind of plant bush that was, kind of one of the centerpieces of my nan's garden. And I think those elements of, creating a very lovely looking, island are, if you don't have that in this world, it doesn't quite work because you don't necessarily believe that they have that brilliant harvest. Why would people believe this so much if it just looked a bit rubbish?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
it kind of feeds into that. So the location, the person who picks the locations and the person who, manage the locations has to get some credit in there as well, as does anybody who works at film. But
they filmed it in the winter as well, and they're freezing.
I mean, there's
I
mean, as you've said that, we see the shot where they're walking along the shore of, I can't remember the name of the Scottish islands that they filmed it on, but if ever you could see brisk and coldness and feel it, it's that thing. Anybody who's walked along a beach in the middle of winter knows how much that sea breeze can get to you.
They said that they had to shoot some of the close-up scenes of people because they could see their breath, and it was supposed to be shot over the May bank holiday.
Apparently, Christopher Lee said that a lot of them had to have ice cubes in their mouth.
Yeah, and a hot fan underneath them blowing them and stuff. So now I can see some of like the hair moving. You wonder, is there a fan blowing the air?
Is that the wind or is it the fan?
Yeah, you don't know.
And I think it's probably a mixture of both. But
I mean, when it gets,
we keep referring back to the film on in the background, but that shot where we see Robin Morrison in the flesh for the first time, that zoom in is such an amazing shot. I know it's been done 100 times, hundreds of thousands of times across cinema, but it is just such a good scene where it's in that cliff face. It just zooms in, and I think it's all just added. The thing that adds to the oddness is that Sergeant Howie is still in the Punch and Judy costume.
Yeah,
it's still, it's still really like an odd image to see. just a Punch and Judy man running to the aid.
At this
you
point,
know.
I started feeling bad for him. Yeah,
Now
like,
is the time when you start getting that more sinister.
Yeah,
You start to feel there is something a bit more going on. It isn't just. It's not at this point. You realise it's not just a different way of people thinking. It's not just a different way, a different belief system. You start to feel like this isn't going to end well. And, if you haven't picked up on that at this point, this is the point that you genuinely go, this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah. He's on. There was an interview with there was a son of the writer of this, and someone was looking at the sort of script notes from the actual original script, and there were parts in it they'd annotated, and it was annotated like crazy, and especially towards the end he had loads to say about it. Oh, what should we do here and stuff. And one of the things was like, are people going to buy that not only does the engine of the seaplane not work, but also the radio doesn't work as well? And I think they just had to leave it as that. But I think there were some moments they thought we maybe not could have done that better, but I guess the audience will have to work out that. And for me in my head I was like, oh, nothing works on that plane. I was thinking like, yeah, I totally believe that someone's gone in there overnight and tampered with a load of the stuff and it doesn't work or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's essentially what I didn't believe it just didn't work. I thought they'd tampered to stop him getting off the island.
I believe they could do that.
Yeah,
there's a whole town of people.
Somebody. Well, even if it's just a case of, I think anybody without any knowledge could probably do that. Well, I think at that point is probably where the fear comes, because they're getting to the end conclusion. I think along the way, if at any point people kind of start lose interest or start to question things from a logic kind of standpoint, the power and the imagery that was created at the end just falls a little flat. So I can kind of understand that almost nitpicking from it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
But I think that I don't think that would have made much of a difference if they'd have come up with some other kind of explanation.
I mean, the fact he arrives on a seaplane is just mental anyway. Like, it's I think really memorable.
I think it's not so much that he arrives on a seaplane. It's the fact that he arrives on a seaplane that he is able to pilot. Like, I can't see that being a part of the main sort of like police academy training module. Do you know what I mean? Like, but
I guess he's just a bit of a. I get the impression he's a bit of a loner. The fact that he does church readings. He's not married. He's married to his job and he's married to God. I get the fact that he is a bit of a loner for some reason, and he's got the money, and maybe not the money, but maybe maybe in that part of the world they need a copper on a seaplane. I'm gonna have to find out later if they have, if that's based on something, because it seems a bit almost like, well, would they make that up, that maybe there are some policemen that have to fly out to some unknown.
That is actually something that at no point do I think anybody really questions. Like, it does seem a bit, why would you not just come by boat?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it adds to the character of it. I think you get obviously you get those really nice shots.
Oh, it's cool.
At the beginning of the film. Certainly, if it's the theatrical cut, it's the opening shots that you see. I think what that does actually, regardless if he came on a boat or a seaplane, the fact that this is on an island and this is a theme we haven't necessarily spoken about yet, but it just adds to that theme of isolation, particularly from Howie's character. He's as you say, he's quite a loner. He is, not only is he isolated in his personal life, he is now actually isolated on this island with a group of people who he doesn't connect with, who he doesn't share any similarities in his own mind. And it's that theme of just total kind of aloneness and isolation, where if he wanted to escape, he cannot escape now, and that seaplane is the last extension of that. One thing that is interesting that I find that I think is a really sort of like interesting and fascinating thing is the little boat that he gets from the seaplane to the shore with.
The eye.
The eye. You think, oh, that's obviously like you can see they've really painstakingly, come up with that design, and that apparently just happened to be in that shot at that particular dock when they went there, and they said, oh, that looks like a nice boat. Oh, that's got a cool eye on it. Shall we use that? And that's what they ended up using. And I do that, that element of happenstance that you can't plan for. Like, yes, you can plan all these things, like the Punch and Judy costume. I would have thought would have been, painstakingly planned. The costumes of Christopher Lee, painstakingly planned. But sometimes the best things are the things that you cannot plan for. And I think in this instance, it's not necessarily a massive thing, but it very early on tells you in a subtle way everybody's kind of watching his every move, because essentially they need him to get to this point at the end. They need him to be in that position where he willingly goes up there. They need him to be the willing sacrifice.
And when he's in this position, and like the women are like, at one point they rub their hair on him, and he just looks like, it's such a mixture of feelings, isn't it? Because he's clearly like, I don't know, he's having his whole very being and reason of existence is being questioned here. And I think there's also a part of him that looked like that's his first contact of a woman properly, when they like rub their hair.
And there's probably the thought going through his mind, what I was saying earlier about questioning his belief, is he's going through this position where he's probably thinking something very, very bad is going to happen, and I may not get out of this alive. And I've committed myself to God, to this belief system, to this religion, and I'm going to die without ever being with somebody, without necessarily loving somebody. And as you say, those emotions, and you see all of those emotions on Edward Woodward's face, when they are rubbing his hair on him, it probably is the first time he's felt, female interaction. And that it just feeds into all of that. He's questioning, have I made the right move? Because there's something about this that feels good, and it shouldn't feel good at this point in his life. He's we know he's about to get burned in a giant wicker man. Spoilers, but I think just one thing on it, because I've made a bit of a joke there. It's one of those things that I think the beauty of the film is that as far as I'm aware, the Wicker Man as a term isn't at any point used in the film. So by the time you get to the end sequence, you've kind of almost forgot. So it's not like you're waiting for the Wicker Man. Obviously, once you've seen it, or to be fair, if you've probably seen a trailer, because I do find that with trailers, they tend to spoil.
You know what? Actually, with Christina earlier, she hadn't probably seen this, but everyone knows the ending.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult in 2025 to not know some form of reference to that.
So I don't know if it would ruin it for her, really, but the new trailer of the remaster shows the Wicker Man burning quite a lot. And to be honest, that's a bit more like... I don't know. When Midsummer is a trailer, I don't think they showed that last thing, the last sequence to that very much. But in the early trailers, they did it like... It's really cool, actually. Like, it's kind of obvious way of doing it, but they did like little subliminal shots of the, like half a second shots of not burning, but just the Wicker Man, like the without it on fire and stuff. So I don't think it would have been ruined for people in the trailers of this back then. I think they would have been like, oh god.
Yeah, but as I say, I think if you do manage to get to the point where you haven't really seen any of that, you've forgotten that it's called the Wicker Man. You've forgotten that, and that's it's almost like a penny drop moment. And it is that before we even see him get in the thing, just the image of that Wicker Man is like, the only words I could use to describe it, and I can remember when I first watched it, what I thought, I just looked at it and went, fucking hell. Like, like the general kind of, you know, the behemoth of it is you know, I mean, it's a spectacle in and of itself to build that,
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
and you know, and then that lovely image of Christopher Lee with his arms up, with his hair gone utterly crazy, which is, I think, is
In another roll neck, as it's the 70s.
yeah, a lovely mustard
He looks
yellow roll
great
neck
in mustards, doesn't he?
great mustard roll neck and what I call history teacher blazer.
Yeah, well,
You know, a friend of mine actually went to a fancy dress party dressed up as Christopher Lee as Lord Summer.
Really?
Yeah, in that image.
Dogtooth, I reckon.
Yeah, it looks
Dogtooth
Dogtooth. We've got the 4K version, but I don't know if it goes that. into
How good is
pixels.
all the lighting in this part as well?
Yeah.
How dark the Wicker Man looks, and how like the sunlight is sort of shining on him. And
Well, as I say,
it's
you know,
great.
getting that final shot is, as I say, you've got a window. You know, you're literally right. The sun is now going down as the Wicker Man goes down. We have, you know, how long does it take the sun to go down in that area? You know, a short window of time. It's a big spectacle. It's a big, you know, it's a big production move, and I can understand British Lion going, we need to make sure we get that shot. You know, otherwise it's going to be months potentially before we can reshoot that. So I kind of get that. One thing I wanted to mention that I stumbled upon when mentioning Christopher Lee, where he's got his arms up and he's praying to, you know, God of the sun. I love the way that his hair has got really, really crazy, obviously, where it's blowing in the wind, and whether or not this was an intended thing, but I think that really, you know, nicely symbolizes he's at the craziest point in his belief system. There is no going back from the, you know, that is the point of no return. You know, his hair for the most part is very, 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 very well kept and is very, very stylized. Soon as he gets up there and we see him praying, we see the, you know, in the background the Wicker Man and Edward Woodward in the Wicker Man, his hair goes crazy, and it's just that nice kind of parallel between his character getting to, you know, the craziest thing he's having to do for his belief, you know.
I think with that, just the last scene, you know, like it makes you evaluate the whole movie as a whole, doesn't it? But it kind of transport you somewhere else, and like, you know, like you said, I have the same thing when I see it, like, oh fuck, and oh dear, you know, like, and it happens in a spoiler alert for another movie, Midsummer, but you know, similar outcome here, but I can't. For me, that was all doom and gloom. The feeling of that ending, a bit of a surprise. You know, she joins the cult or whatever, and then he's wearing a bear costume. Big spoiler, and he's in a sort of some kind of burning effigy type thing. But that was all just dark. It made me think of like, oh god, the horror darkness.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
movie is like you know, introspective psychological thing. It's like you sort of think, you know, in the Midsummer, I'm like, I wouldn't want to be that guy. And in this, I'm not thinking that. I mean, yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to be that guy. But in this, it's just like, whoa, you know, like, wow, like what the sort of, you know, the battle of a sort of two belief systems, how far dogmatic religion can lead you into something, like how messed up your life can get if you live a life of someone who's super repressed and hasn't, you know, lived out, you know, has been living by a doctrine. And then there's all these people that are living by a doctrine, and then there's like Lord Samurai, who I think he isn't living by a doctrine, or a dogma. I think he is exploiting the people, you know, who are blind believers. And really the only person that's come out on top of this from that is kind of just him. And it's like, you know, he's kind of but then he will be next. I feel like, I think like, what, you know, he's been called out of this time, and I think it's only a matter of time before he's the Wicker Man. And I don't know, it's just all these, there's so much to it, and on top of that, the whole scene, it just looks so mental, and it's done so well. And I think this is my favorite horror movie.
And I think just to go off what you're saying about Midsummer, is I feel with that film, it's very much a thing of we've seen them do a lot of horrible shit.
Already. When they jump off the.
So when it gets to that final stage,
doesn't hit as hard.
It doesn't hit as hard. Whereas here, I feel like you're always, up until I'd say the last 20 minutes of the film, you're questioning whether anything is actually going on. You're always going, okay, yeah, they're a bit odd. Okay, yeah, perhaps they're a little bit inappropriate of what they're teaching kids. Yeah, they believe something slightly different. Yeah, they're not the norm. But have they actually done anything? There is no evidence that there's, any foul play here up until, and actually, to be fair, there isn't any foul play until he gets put in the Wicker Man.
Trying to check myself.
I think everything is alluded to and implied, but there isn't anything that they actually do where you go, oh, they are actually a cult, other than that in the sense of there is harm coming to people, and there is
I think up until that point they're a bunch of off-grid hippie cult. The worst you see is mostly like nudity, and I don't know, there's some weird stuff going on with the. I've always watched it thinking there's definitely, I forgot what happened. I was like, this girl's definitely been murdered. So I guess from that, but yeah, you're right. When it's revealed, actually, they all seem to treat that girl pretty nicely. But then, they've obviously made sacrifices before. We can safely assume.
But again, we assume.
Yeah, we assume.
That's the thing. We never actually see any of it. So I think that's part of the beauty is up until we know what is eventually going to happen, we haven't seen any of it, and it is almost that thing of like, is everything just a bit of a red herring? Is it all just? Are we seeing everything just through Sergeant Howie's perspective?
Also, the idea of watching that for the first time, you could definitely just think he's found the girl. They're going to sacrifice. Another film would escape through the cave and he rescues her, and maybe he dies in the process, but he saves the girl. It could still, it would never go that way because it is the Wicker Man, but it's the Wicker Man trope of that he doesn't escape is what makes us know. The reason we know what's going to happen is because we know what this film is.
And I do find that certain films have the arrogance to be bold, like. It is a bleak ending. It is a dark ending when you consider everything at play. And if I can't. As I say, I've not seen the Nicolas Cage version. But if, let's say, there hadn't been that, if they make the Wicker Man today, 100% they would have a happy ending. They would have that Hollywood-esque, even if it wasn't set in Hollywood or set in America, they would have that hero comes to save the day. Yes, he may die, but the girl lives, so it's all good. And okay, yeah, the girl lives here, but the twist is that she was in on it, and she's sent a man to his death.
The Nicolas Cage movie is longer. There's something to be said about how long is this? Like this
is about 95 minutes.
There's something to be said. I think. For me, this is the movie length that is the gold standard of movie.
It's funny you should say that, because Jim has always said that the perfect time for a film is about 90 minutes, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that what ends up happening is, I think the films that tend to be longer are longer, not necessarily because they have that, they have to tell that story, and the only way to tell that story is to have X, Y, and Z, and therefore it is longer. I'm not saying that all longer films are bad, and I'm not saying that all shorter films are good, but for me, let's take a film like Oppenheimer, which is 3 hours long. Now, initially I was like 3 hours long. That's a long time for a film. It kept me entertained and captivated for 3 hours, and I think that, you know, obviously, I think the longer a film gets, the more difficult it is to do that. And I think not a lot of filmmakers are skilled enough to do that. I'm a little bit biased because I am a bit of a Nolan fanboy, admittedly. I think part of the problem is that Marvel films have tended to make 2, 3
Yeah.
3 and a bit hour films the norm. And, you know, because if you think in the 80s or 90s, you would never get away with a superhero or comic book film being, you know, over 3 hours long. But because they built up a rapport with their audience, that they can get away with it. And now I think, you know, films, it seems to be films think that if they're longer, they're better, and they're not necessarily are.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I love loads of long movies. Obviously, I love the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy, and they're all pretty long. And I also love, you know, like The Godfather or something, or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But I think for a lot of the films that I like that are long cover a lot of ground, both geographically or story things. And you can't really do a Godfather in a short. Then again, how long is the Godfather?
The Godfather, I think, is
because the wedding
2.5.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe even closer to 3.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it all. But for this, you know, like where you've got a clear find the girl, haven't found the girl, big ending. It's like, you know, there's no real reason that to me. You know, this nails it in an hour and a half, basically, or whatever.
Yeah, I think one thing it definitely does do, not even. Sorry, let me rephrase. One thing that being shorter definitely aids with replayability and rewatchability, because as much as I loved Oppenheimer, I've not rewatched it, and the reason for that is, do I want to sit down and use 3 hours of my time to watch a film I've already seen? It's a little bit more difficult. With an hour and a half, I can do that. That's fine. Because it's an hour and a half. It's not that long. So I think it certainly helps. You know, since we said we were going to do this, I've watched The Wicker Man 4 times.
Yeah.
Fair enough. It's because there's 4 different versions, but it's a thing of going, I can do that because it's an hour and a half. Oh, I've got an hour and a half here. I'll stick that on. So it certainly helps with that. So I think just to kind of wrap it up, let's go to further watching. Let's, you know, think. You've obviously said one that I hadn't put down, but as soon as you said it, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Midsummer. So what I've got on my list is, if you like Christopher Lee, you kind of got to go and watch any of the Dracula films he's in, but start at the beginning with Horror of Dracula from 1958. We mentioned Hot Fuzz earlier because of the links with Edward Woodward. There's a film called Witchfinder General from 1968 with Vincent Price, which is a very, not necessarily same story, but a folk British horror. There's a film called Kill List with, I can't think of his name, chap who's in Football Factory. Can't think of his name, but that's a great film. And I mentioned it earlier as well, but The League of Gentlemen is, okay, it's a comedy, but it has those kind of same sort of village horror-esque elements to it. So how about yourself? Obviously you mentioned Midsummer earlier.
Yeah, for me, I'll just lean into music-y stuff, because I don't know if we spoke, you know, there's so much with films I love, and this is a new one to add to collection, really, because I only seen it once before. But the films, you know, there's just so much stuff I like about this, and obviously the music is a real big part of why I like it. Like, it's done like Giovanni, whoever that guy
Paul
is.
Giovanni.
What a good gift he's given to us. I mean, I think there's a whole thing on this extra features of how the vinyl became like really sought after, because when they re-put it out, and it, you know, and it was going like £200 a copy at one point, because there wasn't enough and stuff like this. And, you know, you could put this on and just you can feel the vibe of the movie just from the soundtrack. And, you know, the music elevates it to such a level that I think puts this into like masterful film making for me. And not that I know too much about, what was a masterful film. But for me, this is hitting all the good points because it's all the sort of senses. It's like, it's like the horror is, the music is, everything. It's like, it's well good. And so, yeah, for me, it's just other sort of music-y films. So I'd say like Harold and Maude, because it's like a dark sort of cult movie, but it has the music of Cat Stevens. And I feel like that film is just brought to life for the music, much like this is. In fact, that's a great movie. And then this reminds me, because of the 70s-ness of Jesus Christ Superstar, the 70s movie version, which is one of my favourite films. And it's
very similar kind of cinematography in some senses.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of shots that I can see, like, I can see in Jesus Christ Superstar, and I can see the same sort of shot here.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And the sort of grand scale of things and the big zoom outs and whatever, but it's just, obviously that's more of a musical, but it's not, there's something about Jesus Christ Superstar that it doesn't really just land as musical or rock opera in my books. It's like a great film. Do you know what I mean? And this is, this is great. What's another one? I don't know, like The Graduate or something like that. And like I've said before, and yeah, I think that's probably all mine. Yeah. And Midsummer, now I would just, anyone that likes that movie, I would just be telling them to watch this. I wouldn't necessarily go back to that anytime soon, just because I think prefer this.
I think if you wanted a much darker version, then Midsummer would absolutely be one you would need to check out. So moving on to our rating for the film. Out of 10 skulls, 0 being worst film ever made, 10 being absolutely perfect, how many skulls would you give it?
I mean, if 10 is perfect, the overdub takes it away, just that one thing. But it's 10 skulls, but the 10th skull has a crack. Do you know what I mean? It's like a cracked skull.
I like that.
But it's only a dent, because to me, like, this film is clearly such an inspiration to so many other films. It's like its own thing. It's like, much like I said about Jumanji. Jumanji's Jumanji. This is the Wicker Man. So we'll get to some other films at some point where I'm like 6 skulls, mate. Okay. Yeah, it's a good movie. But
so far, you're 2 for 2 with 9.5 skulls.
Well, no, this is a 10 skulls. But this is higher ranked than Jumanji.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to go for 8 skulls, which is, for me, is a really, really good score. I put it this way: my favourite film ever isn't even 10 skulls, because I don't think there is a perfect movie out there. So yeah, I think 8 skulls for me. So on an average, that's probably about a 9. So 9 skulls as an average. So that's our kind of rating of it. Now, we know those things are slightly arbitrary, but it gives you an understanding of where we're sitting in terms of recommendations. So if you haven't watched The Wicker Man and you've listened to this podcast, we apologise because we have spoiled it for you, but absolutely go and watch it. And if you've seen it previously, I would 100% recommend picking up the 4K version, the new version where it's got the theatrical cut, the director's cut, the final cut.
Good special features too. Like, actually, it's got great little, like,
it's a great, really, really great release from Studio Canal. Because I do miss that with the advent of kind of streaming. You miss those DVD extras and those special features.
Really cool artwork as well, right?
Yeah,
like,
fantastic art.
Like, it kind of keeps up with the modern Midsummer. Like, the artwork is kind of, it made me feel like watching a new movie.
Good evening and welcome to Inside the Actor's Mind, the show that delves deep into the psyche to find out what makes a great character, a great performance, and what makes a great actor. I'm Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Join me as we go deep into the actor's mind. King Julius Oxbridge Teeth III. Won't you join me next week as we go deep into the actor's mind?
Unfortunately, it's come to that time in the episode where we have to say goodbye. We hope you've enjoyed the episode as much as we've enjoyed recording it for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts from, and also head over to our social media platforms to stay up to date. We thank you for listening to Jimmy Murphy, Simon Keet and Ryan Etherington. Together, we are Bury Our Bones with Cinema.
And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just swear without if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
Maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?